my goodness, this is awful!
Hey viewer, this is your Royal Majesty, the CDI Queen, bringing you another world's first positive review for the Philips CDI. As you know, I grew up with this oddball gaming system, so I've developed a sympathetic appreciation for it over the years. Thus, I prefer to spread positivity, whether it be by genuinely appreciating their good qualities or by explaining the rich nostalgia that I hold for them. These CDI titles that I discuss in the series are among my top favorites. In this video, we are looking at the curious, disjointed space adventure masterpiece, dare I say, that is Kether. This is one of my absolute favorite games, just below Laser Lords, which I also spent endless hours playing as a kid. Sadly, I haven't been able to find any kind of insider information on Kether, so I won't be able to regale you with fascinating backstories on its development. What I can provide is the experience that I had with it growing up, now, and details of how interesting and weird the game is. I honestly think that Kether is really hard to describe in a negative context, for me at least, because I think it brings more to the table than it takes away. Do you remember Zelda's Adventure and how that lack of exposition kind of leaves us feeling confused, a little empty, and really wanting more? Well, take a seat, my friend, as long as you have enough rubies. Yes, I really said that. To summarize, Kether is a space adventure where you play as Melkor, a galactic knight who must rescue the Princess of Wisdom, sound familiar, Ida Kareen, from the evil Kork, who has taken over the planet Kether. You save Ita Kareen by conquering 5 temples that orbit the planet of Kether. Well, it sounds simple, right? Well, it is. The gameplay is really straightforward and it's super easy to master. In fact, I could probably summarize the entire game in just a paragraph or two, but I'm not going to because that's not what I do. I can't do anything in just a paragraph or two. You should see my work emails. But what I find most fascinating about Kether is this teeny tiny little bit of plot that they tease us with, filling in little small cracks with these details and imagery that we honestly never get explained at all. I think a lot of CDI titles are really good at withholding exposition. The game begins with what appears to be a cutscene taken straight out of Space Odyssey. Floating monolith out in space, weird crystalline beings. We find out that we are Melkor, a humanoid from the Orion Nebula. He's been suspended in ionic stasis for his last battle, and according to the game manual, he is in line to become a member of the Order of Light Council. We also learn that the planet Kether, which we're orbiting, is mostly destroyed from greenhouse gases, and it's currently the year 3795 of the 5th cycle. Whatever that means. We are then introduced to the Emperor of Light, who is a personification of Enoi, the creator of light who reigns over all galaxies, and plays the role of our guardian/god through the game. He's a disembodied yellow head, looks kind of like a Moai statue from Easter Island, and he provides an antithesis to the floating head of Kork, which we hopefully do not see. We have another guide throughout the game called Central Computer, and this is an altered male voice which presumably is your spacecraft's onboard AI system, akin to HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey, but don't hold me to that, I haven't seen it. Enoi explains that he had prepared us for this quest a very long time ago, likely before he was suspended in ionic stasis. Now is probably a good time to mention that Kether was originally in French, and at least in the US version you can play it both English and French. Central Computer pronounces it Ionic, but the manual says Ionic, and I'm pretty sure it means Ionic, not Eonic, because I think he's been suspended not as long as an eon. I don't know, man. This is what's weird about the game. But long story short, we learn that we have to free Princess Ita Kareen from her prison on Malkuth. Or on Kether. Or somewhere. So here's a funny story, and it's gotten funnier over the years. Believe it or not, I wrote the draft for this video way back in September of 2022. It's June of 2024 and I'm finally recording. But in September of 2022, it was just a couple months before my then fiance, my now husband, got me to watch the 3 original Star Wars movies. So I have to add, after watching those, I think Kether is nothing more than a cheap French Star Wars knockoff. And this was probably really obvious to all of you. But when my whole life has gone by without seeing Star Wars, and this has been like really fresh, clever ideas of stuff, so I'm sorry, but I'm late to the party as usual. Anyway, back to the game. What appears to be going on is that Melkor was suspended in a cryogenic-like process to wait until he was needed in the future, because he's a valuable space knight who can take on Quark, and Quark alone. Thinking kind of Breath of the Wild sort of deal. Now that Quark is taking over Kether, it's time to wake up. But why was Melkor suspended? We don't know. Who is Quark? We don't know. Why is Kether so important? We still don't know. As I mentioned earlier, we have to travel to 5 temples in order to save the princess. The 5 temples of wisdom have some conflicting information in the game and the manual. They are orbiting Kether, but they are also in different space-time zones. The manual also says we have to search for the 5 planets of the galaxy. So what are they? Apparently, the temples were created eons ago by the temple elders, but that's all we know. That's all we know. Gameplay has 3 stages, where you travel to the temple, which involves moving our little spaceship around to avoid obstacles, which kind of play like a movie. We collect green pulsar orbs and we are weak. And if we take too much damage during this stage, we will lose one of our lives and have to pilot through Quark's underworld, which is full of different colored stars. Those stars, when contacted, will randomly spit you out at other temple travel sequences. However, between the 2 segments of travel when we're going to a temple, we get a little message from Enoy where he gives us words of encouragement, and he always says to look at the star which can save you. But this is actually a tip. In each of those visions, he has a different colored star on his forehead. Said star color will get you back on track to that temple you had chosen if you get stuck in Quark's underworld. This seems like a very simple concept, but honestly, I never put 2 and 2 together as a kid. Once we make it through 2 phases of space-time travel, we then arrive at the temple and must complete a puzzle of varying difficulty to get in. Then, in the 3rd part of gameplay, we go around a maze, collecting runes in sacred rooms called Chambers of Pulsar. They like that pulsar. And avoiding these actually pretty creepy-looking monsters until we get all 5 runes. We then enter the final chamber of Pulsar and get a cryptic message from Ida Kareen herself, mostly pieces of the past, talking about Quark's war on Kether, or the universe, or whatever. What's crazy is that it's currently year 3795 of the 5th cycle. Ida Kareen was captured by Quark 7 years prior, but her message alludes to like 11,000 of the 4th cycle, so it's like crazy how much time's going by. I don't think anybody actually made a timeline when they made the game, but the only important part of her message for most players is the number of stars it randomly generates at the end of the transmission. The groups of stars from the 4 temples makes the star code necessary to open the airlock of Quark's spaceship, which is the final temple. Although that temple is Malkuth, it's just Quark's base. But it's one of the temples made by the elders, but I don't know. Maybe he took over it. Anyway, every time you play the game, it generates a new sequence of stars. What I have found over the years, having had a couple different discs of Kether, the first thing to go when the disc starts to get old is those stars. So, sucks. Curiously, let's get a little deeper now. The temples are named Hokmat, Geburah, Netzach, Hod, and Malkuth, which are almost names, of the Sephiroth on the Kabbalah Tree of Life. Kabbalah is a complicated subject, which I'm not going to get into. But the bottom line here is that Kabbalah has no real significance in the game aside from the names. At least I don't think so. Kether is also a Sephiroth on the tree. In fact, it's the crown on the tree being the most important one, I guess. So the creators of the game were trying to say something. Ida Korean says a couple times that hatred created the war and that Cork is made of evil thoughts. Maybe it makes more sense if you hear it in French. Back to the puzzles to get into the temple. They're not terribly difficult, aside from the fact that the cursor of the CDI is really sticky, and half of the challenge is getting it on the right space, which really isn't fair. Like, the mechanics of the actual console and controller should not be what makes the puzzle hard. They each have a timer, and the puzzle for Netzach seems to be half the time of others, and you really need like 3 times the amount of time to do it. So, Hawkmat is a game of memory, which is very easy. Geburah is Simon. That's where you play the tone, you have to match it, and plays 1, you be the next one, you got 2. HUD is kind of this weirder matching game where you're like scrolling through a bunch of different faces.
These are the faces of evil.
And you have to cancel out the face as it shows up. It's weird, but it makes sense when you do it. And our favorite Netzach, it's a rune cipher that needs to be decoded by matching. And it has all of the runes in the entire game. And it's just 4 of them that you have to figure out the code for. And it's super unforgiving. Combined with the time restriction and the difficulty of moving the cursor, it can totally raise your blood pressure. Central Computer, our helper on our heroic journey, is supposed to provide instructions on these puzzles, but, as luck would have it, Central Computer's explanation of the puzzles wins first prize for being overcomplicated and vague. You will see what I mean when we listen to him explaining how to play that simple childhood game of memory to get into Hawkmat.
Questioning Central Computer. Translation ongoing. Analysis of sublight waves indicates vanished civilizations. Rays of the Sun of Wisdom have been extinguished for 6,000 years. To go there where the sun no longer shines, turn each square and remember its position. Display the Hawkmat blazons in pairs.
You see, this is what I'm talking about when I say this game has all these cool details, but it gives you 0 explanation. Like, I think it's worth playing just to pick apart these messages, to try to figure out a timeline and the purpose of these different people and places. And this is why I've been coming back to this game so many time and time again, and why I find it really, really captivating. The interior of the temples are also really cool. Do note that the chambers of Pulsar have these guardians of light that appear as brief ghostly images before the rune of that particular hall displays. The inside of Hawkmat is designed after old Egyptian ruins. Geburah's hallways are these kind of worn down yellow stones, but the chambers of Pulsar within them are filled with crystals and timepieces. Geburah was always my favorite as a kid. Funny, though, that Central Computer says Geburah associates matter with sound, so one would have expected the temple to be sound-related, not time. Moving on, the Temple of Hod is an advanced spaceship that's been destroyed. Unknown if Cork did it, or if it was done prior, which is also interesting to note that Hod's light creatures look like monks and nothing to do with spacemen. And then lastly, Netzach is Greco-Roman with the columns and gods like Mercury and Poseidon and things like that. Honestly, I could probably make an entire series of Kether talk to theorize about all of this. Comment if you would be interested in listening to a really deep dive of hypotheses on all the imagery and pieces of the puzzle that we get in this game. I might do it if you guilt trip me enough. See, what's not entirely clear is the purpose of these temples. Like, just the general purpose of them. It's assumed that they were sacred temples for eons, and Cork only recently invaded, but then how does Hawkmat look so ancient, and Hod looks so futuristic? Sadly, as you may have guessed, the game never tells us any more about these temples, other than we need to visit them. Playing through the game has bound to get your imagination flowing and asking questions, as it has for me since I was about 6 or so when I first played it. I also have to admit that I'm kind of a fan of the soundtrack, as little as it is. It's been kind of weird music, but it's got this provocative feeling that's hard to explain. I've always enjoyed it. Now then, we're coming to the end of the video, so let's talk about the ending of the game. If you've played it, you're probably laughing or facepalming right now, because everything is about to come full circle in the most anticlimactic way. If you haven't played the game and you want to be disappointed and surprised, then turn the video off right now and get thee to a CDI. Okay, spoiler warning is over. There isn't even a boss battle. Ida Kareen literally just shows up and says that you faced off against Cork. And by the way, Cork is within you. And that's the end. See, I think the game creators really are trying to do something metaphorical. It's not about the battle, it's the journey, it's the inner journey. The end sequence, while you're sitting there going, wait a minute, I thought I was gonna fight him. The end sequence shows Ita Kareen being freed, Enoy turns into the sun, and Kether returns to its old life, which they make a big point to say, Earth. I will admit that the ending is a little weak, even though I respect that they're trying to make a statement about the planet. It's vague and strange, and it is oddly beautiful, painfully 90s, and generally it feels good in my soul, despite leaving me confused and lacking. But either way, it's a really, really great game. You can win it in like 10 minutes as long as your stars are working. It has a lot of potential for daydreaming. I enjoyed the 3 stages going to each level. The flying portion's like an arcade game. The entry puzzles are kind of this mystical mystery. Critics find the maze portion to be repetitive, but I think they're cool, and they remind me of the point-and-click games from the 90s, like the puzzles you find in Myst. The 3D rendering is also pretty immaculate for the early 90s. Mind you, that includes the still shots and the 3D objects during space-time travel. I mean, the rendered still of each puzzle is really cool, and the insides of the temples all have a really unique style to them. I also give the game developers credit for making the monsters actually pretty scary looking. All in all, I really love Kether, and I always strongly recommend it. It's fun, it's a little challenging, it's not too hard, the plot makes you scratch your head, but it also makes you think a little deeper about life. Have you played Kether? What do you think it all means? Comment below and let's start a discussion. Last but not least, if you can't get a CDI, then you can always check out my friend Seb, the Half-Blind Gamer's YouTube channel. He's got wonderful, wonderful playthroughs with very clever and thoughtful narrations, nothing obnoxious and loud and annoying like mine. He's got a wonderful playthrough of Kether, so if you can't get yourself to a console or a other means of playing it, then check out his channel and enjoy the game from a distance. Remember to follow me on Twitter for more CDI fun. Check out my live streams whenever I get around to them on Twitch. And if you really want to, show me some love on Patreon. Actually, better than show me some love on Patreon, give me some ideas of what to reward my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time, I swear. Stars from the 4 temples make the star code necessary to open the airlock of Spork. The group of stars from the 4 temples makes the star code. Wow, this is hard to say. The manual also says we have to search the 5 planets I wrote planers. What the fuck is it supposed to be? Where's the manual? Probably planet.
Questioning central computer. Translation ongoing. Analysis of sublight wave indicates civilizations raised to the sun of wisdom.